There are objects scattered across the ruins of normal life that practically beg to be ignored. They sit in church halls, hotel lobbies, school auditoriums, suburban living rooms, music stores, and the kind of dusty corners where civilization goes to die in installments. Most people would walk right past them in a collapse. Some would use them as a table. Some would stack canned beans on top of them. Some genius with the survival instincts of a decorative pillow would probably chop one up for firewood and congratulate himself for being resourceful. And that is exactly why the piano might be one of the most criminally overlooked supply caches in the post-apocalyptic world. Because when people hear the word piano, they think culture. They think recitals, Christmas songs, rich grandparents, and children being forced to practice scales instead of enjoying freedom. They think music, which in the average person's mind means luxury, not necessity, not survival, not food, shelter, tools, security, medicine, trade, or heat. Just a giant wooden monument to pre-collapse optimism. But that assumption is the kind of mistake that gets people cold, hungry, and dead, while someone smarter is quietly dismantling the furniture and walking away with enough high-grade materials to outfit a serious survival system. A piano is not just an instrument, it is a machine. A brutally over-engineered, precision-built machine designed to survive insane mechanical stress for decades. Inside that polished wooden shell is a small industrial ecosystem. Hardened steel, high-tension wire, dense wool felt, thick hardwood, copper windings, and, in many cases, a massive cast-iron plate strong enough to resist forces that would make cheaper metal fold like wet cardboard. This thing spends its life under tension that would make most scavenged junk cry for its mother. Hundreds of strings are stretched tight enough to produce clean pitch without snapping. Pins lock that tension in place year after year. Felt survives impact after impact after impact, because every key press is basically a tiny controlled act of violence. Everything inside the piano has one job: hold up under pressure, which, conveniently, is also your job when the world turns into a scavenger hunt hosted by Satan. That is what makes it so valuable. In survival, quality matters more than appearance. The rusty shelf bracket from a garage might look useful because it resembles hardware. Meanwhile, the piano, elegant and harmless and domesticated, is sitting there packed with materials so much better than the stuff in a bargain bin toolbox that it's almost offensive. In a real emergency, people tend to search by category. Kitchen means food, garage means tools, pharmacy means medicine, bedroom means blankets. They think in neat, civilized labels because their brains were trained by stores, catalogs, and apartment layouts. But collapse doesn't care about categories. Collapse rewards people who can look at an object and stop seeing what it was for and start seeing what it is made of. And the first treasure hidden inside that giant wooden lyre is the wire. A standard piano contains around 230 strings, and those strings are not decorative nonsense. They are high-carbon steel wire, engineered for extreme tensile strength, elasticity, and long-term fatigue resistance. In plain English, this means the metal was designed to be stretched hard, vibrated constantly, and still not fail. That kind of performance is not normal. You are not getting that from random coat hangers, picture wire, or whatever sad little spool somebody bought at a hardware store to hang a houseplant in 2009. Piano wire, often called music wire, is serious material. Thin for its strength, resilient, springy, and capable of handling load far beyond what most scavenged wire can tolerate for the same diameter. That matters immediately in a survival setting. Thin wire is useful, strong thin wire is gold. The thinner treble strings are ideal for snares because they combine strength with low visibility. Animals don't care about your motivational speeches or your rugged beard oil aesthetic. If you want passive food collection, you need traps that hold shape, keep tension, and disappear into the environment. A soft wire bends, kinks, and fails. Piano wire behaves like it was insulted personally and refuses to quit. One intact piano can give you enough snare material to set a serious trap line, which means you now have a way to collect calories while doing other jobs. That is survival math. People consistently underestimate. Passive systems beat heroic effort. The guy spending 12 hours dramatically stalking rabbits with a sharpened stick is going to starve with excellent posture. The person who sets efficient snares and checks them intelligently is eating. Then there is perimeter security. Medium-gauge strings can be stretched as trip lines for alarms, warning systems, or simple defensive setups around a shelter. They resist sagging, they hold tension over distance, and in low light, they become nearly invisible. That last part is useful for you and extremely inconvenient for anyone approaching your camp with bad intentions, poor night vision, or the self-confidence of a looter who has never met consequences. Tie one to a noisemaker, a stack of scrap metal, or any improvised alert device, and suddenly, your sleeping position becomes slightly less suicidal. Disaster psychology always favors the prepared over the reactive. People panic because panic is easier than planning. Wire gives planning teeth. The heavier bass strings are even better because they are basically a 2-for-1 prize inside the same machine. These strings usually have a steel core wrapped in copper. Strip them down, and now you have separate materials with separate uses. Steel for strength, copper for electrical improvisation, signaling, repairs, and trade. In any long emergency, conductivity becomes valuable fast. Maybe you're rigging a simple circuit. Maybe you're repairing old equipment. Maybe you're building a crude antenna to pull information out of the air, while everyone else is reduced to rumors and conspiracy theories whispered around a fire made from IKEA furniture. Information is survival. Copper helps. And the wire doesn't stop at trapping or alarms. It can be twisted into cutting tools, formed into hooks, bent into improvised needles, shaped into picks, or used as spring stock for triggers and mechanisms. Stretch a length between two handles and you have a friction saw that can cut wood, plastic, and softer materials when blades are scarce. Is it elegant? No. Does collapse care about elegance? Also no. The point is function. The point is options. Survival is rarely about finding the perfect tool. It is about turning one good material into 6 decent solutions before sundown. That is the hidden genius of the piano. It is not one item. It is a library of components disguised as decor. And while everyone else is still thinking in pre-collapse categories, asking whether music matters at the end of the world, you are staring at a machine full of steel and realizing the answer is yes, just not in the way they think. If the wire is the piano's nervous system, then the tuning pins are its teeth. And like most things in civilized life, people completely misunderstand them because they are hidden behind a polite exterior. Every piano contains roughly 230 of these little steel monsters, one for each string, and each one exists to do something absurdly demanding. Hold a ridiculous amount of tension, year after year, without slipping. That is not decorative hardware. That is a box of pre-forged survival components pretending to be part of a musical instrument so society wouldn't get suspicious. A tuning pin is short, thick, tough, and made from hardened steel. One end is tapered. The other is squared, so a tuning wrench can grip it. In normal life, a pianist never thinks about them. They press a key, hear a note, and move on with their emotionally complicated evening. But in a collapse, these pins become something much more interesting. Pull one out, and what you are holding is basically a ready-made steel awl, punch, spike, fastener, and tool blank all at once. Multiply that by over 200. And now your sad abandoned church piano has quietly become a blacksmith starter kit. The tapered end is useful immediately. Leather, canvas, thick fabric, hide, bark, thin wood, softer sheet metal. These pins can punch through all of it with enough force and patience. That means hole making, which sounds boring right up until you realize half of survival engineering is just finding better ways to connect things. Need to stitch leather? Hole. Need to lace a shelter flap? Hole. Need to improvise a belt, reinforce a tarp, build a pouch, repair footwear, or make a crude harness? Congratulations! Your music room furniture is now doing textile and leather work better than most modern junk drawers ever could. And because the squared end fits tools, you can grip these pins more effectively than random nails or scrap rods. They can be driven into wood as improvised dowels or pegs. They can reinforce joints. They can act as anchors in materials that would laugh at weaker fasteners. In a world where manufactured hardware will disappear from shelves faster than toilet paper during the first week of public stupidity, having a stockpile of strong uniform steel pegs is not a small advantage. It is infrastructure. Survival isn't just about finding resources, it's about standardization. When your materials are consistent in size, hardness, and shape, every repair becomes easier. Every project becomes repeatable. And repeatability is what separates a shelter from a system. But the real beauty of tuning pins appears when you stop treating them as finished objects and start treating them as raw stock. Each one is a compact cylinder of quality steel, already processed to survive mechanical stress. Heat one in a hot fire, hammer it against a flat stone or a chunk of steel, and you can rework it into something new. A small blade, a chisel point, a fish hook, a nail, a bodkin, a scratch-all, a narrow drill point, a latch component, a crude arrowhead. You are not starting from garbage. You are starting from metal that was selected specifically because it could resist deformation and hold under load. That matters more than most people realize. Poor steel wastes your labor. Good steel rewards it. And labor is expensive after collapse. Calories are expensive. Time is expensive. Injury is expensive. This is something modern people struggle to grasp because our entire economy is built around convenience and replacement. We don't repair much anymore. We replace, reorder, swipe, subscribe, and then act surprised when we discover that apps cannot fix a torn boot in freezing weather. In a real disaster, craftsmanship comes roaring back with a vengeance. The person who can shape, punch, stitch, fasten, and improvise has social gravity. They become useful. And useful people tend to live longer than loud people. That same principle applies to the next material hiding inside the piano, the felt. Now, I know felt does not sound dramatic. It sounds like a kindergarten art project, or something your aunt bought at a hobby store to make a seasonal table runner. But piano felt is not craft fluff. It is dense wool material, engineered to absorb impacts, reduce friction, and maintain shape through endless mechanical punishment. It sits in hammers, dampers, bushings, and padding points throughout the piano's action. This is not cheap decorative fabric. This is industrial-grade compressed wool, selected because it can survive millions of strikes and still do its job. Which means, in survival terms, it is weirdly premium. Wool has a nearly magical property that becomes priceless when conditions turn ugly. It still insulates when wet. Cotton becomes a refrigerated regret. Many synthetics lose performance or melt near heat. Wool keeps working. Even damp wool retains a lot of insulating value because of the way its fibers trap air. In cold, wet environments, that can be the difference between discomfort and hypothermia. And hypothermia doesn't care whether you died heroically or stupidly. It just lowers your core temperature while you make increasingly bad decisions and insist you're fine. Extracted piano felt can be cut and layered into boot insulation, glove lining, hand wraps, joint padding, or emergency inserts for clothing. If your shoes are compromised and in prolonged disaster, the usually irredence wool padding can save your feet from blistering, frostbite, and trench misery. That sounds unglamorous until you understand a brutal truth of survival history. People with damaged feet become cargo. Mobility is life. Healthy feet are freedom. It also has medical value. Clean wool felt can be used as padding around splints, as pressure material in wound management, and as absorbent lining where softer but denser structure is needed. It is not a sterile hospital dressing, and nobody should pretend otherwise. But in austere settings, you work with gradients of better and worse. Dense, clean, prepared felt is often better than random filthy cloth ripped from a curtain and blessed with optimism. In disaster medicine, pressure, cleanliness, insulation, and immobilization matter more than cinematic drama. You are not trying to look cool. You are trying to stop bleeding, preserve warmth, and reduce damage long enough to survive the next day. It also works in filtration systems as a pre-filter layer to remove sediment before boiling or chemical treatment. No, wool felt alone does not make dirty water magically safe, because this is not a fantasy novel, and your gut lining is not a testing lab. But as part of a layered system, it helps remove particulate matter and improves the effectiveness of later treatment. This is how practical survival thinking works. Not miracle solutions, but stacked advantages. Bit by bit, material by material, decision by decision. So now the piano has already given you wire for traps and alarms, steel pins for fabrication, and wool felt for insulation, padding, and field utility. And we still have not reached the heaviest, meanest, most gloriously misunderstood part of the machine. The part almost nobody will value until metal becomes scarce and reality starts charging interest. That final prize is the cast iron plate, sometimes called the harp. And this is the moment when the piano stops looking like a scavenged oddity and starts looking like a warehouse collapsed into a single object. This plate is the giant metal skeleton inside the instrument, the part that quietly absorbs the combined pull of all those strings without warping into a tragic modern art piece. In many pianos, especially grands, that total tension reaches into the tens of thousands of pounds. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Which means the plate had to be built from metal substantial enough to resist forces that would flatten lesser junk into apology letters. And this is where most people in a collapse make the same mistake they always make. They focus on what is easy to burn, easy to carry, easy to identify, and easy to brag about. They grab the hatchet, the gas can, the shiny multi-tool, the tactical nonsense with 6 logos on it. Meanwhile, sitting behind a row of yellowed keys in an abandoned church is a slab of iron that can outperform half the improvised hardware in the county. The average person sees too big, too heavy, too weird, and walks away. Which is wonderful news for you, because scarcity rewards the patient and punishes the theatrical. A cast iron piano plate is not subtle. In an upright, it may weigh well over 100 pounds. In a grand, several hundred. It is a concentrated mass of useful metal sitting inside an object people classify as cultural decoration. That classification error is your advantage. In any prolonged breakdown, metal becomes one of the most valuable resources in existence. Good metal means tools, cooking surfaces, anchors, brackets, repair stock, thermal mass, and trade. Good metal also means time saved. You don't have to spend 3 days pulling rusted scraps from ruined sheds if one neglected instrument gives you a serious reserve of high-value material in a single location. Now, cast iron has limits. It is hard, durable, and excellent for certain tasks, but it is also brittle compared with softer steels. That is not a flaw. That is information. Survival always begins with understanding the personality of a material. Cast iron does not like to bend. It likes to stay as it is, right up until it doesn't, and then it fractures. So if you want to break a piano plate into smaller, usable sections, you are not persuading it. You are introducing it to force. A sledgehammer, wedges, repeated blows along stress point. Eventually, it gives up and breaks into chunks, plates, or irregular fragments that can then be repurposed. Those fragments are useful in more ways than most people would imagine. Flat sections can become cooking surfaces over a fire, not elegant cookware. Better, stable, heat-tolerant, long-lasting slabs that distribute heat far more evenly than flimsy sheet metal. In a post-grid world, thermal stability matters. You do not want your improvised cooktop buckling, scorching through, or throwing your dinner into the ashes because it came from some wafer-thin appliance panel. Cast iron holds heat, spreads heat, and survives abuse. There is a reason old civilizations loved heavy metal cookware. Because physics does not care that modern people prefer products that look sleek in online listings. That same heat retention makes cast iron excellent as thermal mass inside a shelter. Heat the metal thoroughly in a fire, move it safely, wrap or isolate it properly, and it will radiate warmth for hours. Not forever, not magically, but enough to smooth out temperature swings and make a shelter more livable through the night. In cold conditions, stored heat is sanity. Anyone who has spent time in serious winter exposure understands that warmth is not just comfort. Warmth preserves judgment, dexterity, morale, and sleep. And sleep, in a disaster, is a weapon. Exhausted people make emotional decisions. Warm people make plans. Sections of the plate can also serve as hard work surfaces. A chunk mounted on a stump becomes a crude anvil for shaping lighter metals, flattening stock, peening fasteners, or doing any ugly little fabrication task that collapse throws at you. Suddenly, your shelter is not just a place to hide from weather, it is a workshop, and workshops create leverage. A person with a workshop can repair tools, make brackets, shape hooks, flatten pins, and barter services. This is how post-disaster hierarchy quietly emerges. Not from who yells the loudest, from who can fix what breaks. There is also trade value, and people underestimate that because they think trade begins with currency. It doesn't. Trade begins with asymmetry. You have something useful that other people cannot easily produce. They need it. You don't need to like them. Cast iron stock, especially in useful sizes, becomes valuable because making it from scratch is hard, and scavenging equivalent quality takes time. One piano plate, carefully broken and stored, becomes a long-term reserve of practical value, not glamorous value, not collectible value. Functional value, which is the only kind civilization ever really respected beneath all its branding and scented candles. And this is where the psychology gets interesting. In every collapse scenario, there are two kinds of scavengers. The first kind grabs obvious items: flashlights, knives, batteries, fuel, canned food, good, necessary, rational. The second kind goes one layer deeper. They ask a better question. What objects contain systems, materials, or components everyone else is misclassifying? That second question is where real advantage lives. It is how one person sees a bicycle and thinks transportation, while another sees bearings, cables, chain, rubber, spokes, and a frame full of engineered tubing. It is how one person sees a curtain and thinks fabric, while another sees insulation, bandaging, camouflage, and cordage. It is how one person sees a piano and thinks concert, while another sees metallurgy, mechanics, textiles, and mass. And if modern society has trained people to do anything badly, it is to notice structure. We live in a world of labels, apps, polished interfaces, and disposable convenience. We are encouraged to interact with outcomes, not internals. Push the button, tap the icon, order the replacement. Nobody wants you understanding how anything works, because then you become difficult to market to. That mental laziness becomes deadly during disaster. The person waiting for an item labeled survival gear is already behind. The person who can look at ordinary objects and extract hidden utility is operating in the real economy of collapse. So when you add it all together, the piano becomes almost absurd in its value. Hundreds of lengths of high-tension steel wire across multiple gauges. Hundreds of hardened steel tuning pins, ready for direct use or tool making. Several pounds of dense wool felt with insulation, medical, and mechanical utility. A giant reserve of cast iron for heat, fabrication, cooking, and trade. And that's before you even start thinking about the hardwood structure, the brass hardware, the key materials, and all the smaller components that a patient scavenger can still exploit. Which is why, in the aftermath of a serious breakdown, the smartest person in the room might not be the one with the biggest weapon. It might be the one standing in front of a dusty, upright piano with a pry bar, and the expression of somebody who just found an entire hardware aisle hidden inside a song. By the time most people realize what really matters after a collapse, the easy phase is already over. The first days are all noise and adrenaline. Grocery stores get stripped by people who think survival means owning 17 jars of pasta sauce and exactly 0 practical skills. Social media addicts, if the grid is somehow still coughing out a signal, will spend the opening chapter of the apocalypse trying to film themselves next to burning intersections, like unpaid extras in the dumbest documentary ever made. Half the population will be searching for labels they recognize. Food, weapons, medicine, batteries, fine, necessary, but obvious. The real edge comes later. When shelves are empty, panic hardens into routine, and the people still standing have to start building systems instead of fantasies. That is when hidden resource nodes become priceless. And a piano is exactly that. A silent, overbuilt cache of specialized materials disguised as a relic of civilized life. Once you stop seeing it as an instrument and start seeing it as a machine, the whole logic changes. You're no longer asking whether a piano matters in the end of the world. You're asking how many different survival problems can be solved by one object everybody else dismissed because it reminded them of recitals and holiday songs. Think about the full inventory in practical terms. More than 200 high-tension steel strings in multiple thicknesses, each one useful for trapping, perimeter alarms, fishing rigs, bindings, improvised cutting systems, springs, trigger mechanisms, and tool repair. More than 200 hardened tuning pins that can punch, fasten, brace, or be reforged into smaller implements. Pounds of dense wool, felt that can insulate, cushion, pad splints, pre-filter water, line footwear, protect hands, and reduce friction in anything mechanical you have to improvise later. And then the plate. A huge reserve of cast iron for thermal mass, fabrication, cooking, shaping, trade, and long-term utility. One piano does not give you one thing. It gives you categories. It gives you options. It gives you manufacturing potential in a world where manufacturing has become a memory. And that changes your survival posture. People who live day to day scavenge for consumption. People who plan for duration scavenge for production. That distinction is enormous. Consumption means eating the food, burning the fuel, wearing out the tool. Production means setting the snare, building the alarm, fixing the shelter, making the bracket, repairing the boot, trading the extra hardware, creating a little circle of order inside a hostile environment. The piano belongs to that second world. It is not a quick fix. It is leverage. There's also a broader lesson buried in this, and it may be the most important part. The reason the piano is so valuable is not just because of what it contains. It's because almost no one will think to check. That is a pattern worth memorizing. In every disaster, perception lags behind reality. People cling to old meanings long after those meanings stop being useful. A hotel lobby piano still looks like decoration. A church piano still looks like worship furniture. A school auditorium piano still looks like a leftover from choir practice and assemblies nobody misses. But collapse rewrites object identities whether your brain is ready or not. The winners adapt faster. This is true in psychology too. One of the most overlooked survival skills is cognitive flexibility, the ability to stop expecting the world to behave the way it used to and start using what actually exists in front of you. People who cannot do that freeze. They waste precious hours searching for ideal solutions that no longer exist. They reject imperfect tools because those tools do not match the categories they are emotionally attached to. They keep trying to live in the old world, using the vocabulary of the old world, even while the walls are literally on fire. Flexible thinkers survive because they reclassify fast. Chair becomes firewood. Curtain becomes bandage. Fence becomes security material. Piano becomes a compact warehouse of steel, wool, copper, hardwood, and iron. And yes, there is dark comedy in that. We spent generations treating pianos as symbols of refinement, discipline, taste, and cultural sophistication. Then the grid fails. The trucks stop moving. And suddenly that same symbol of civilized prestige turns out to be more useful, taken apart than played. There's something wonderfully savage about that. It's the apocalypse stripping away our sentimental labels and saying, no, actually, this wasn't art first. It was engineering with a soundtrack. Somewhere in the ruins, a person who once argued online about minimalist interior design is now staring at a baby grand and realizing it contains more practical value than their entire apartment did. And here is the final strategic advantage. Neglected pianos are common. Not everywhere, not in unlimited numbers, but common enough that once you develop the eye for them, You start noticing likely locations immediately. Churches, schools, community centers, older homes, music shops, hotels, small theaters, lodges, funeral homes, occasionally, because apparently even grief needed background accompaniment before the world ended. Many of these places will be scavenged early for food, electronics, or obvious tools. The piano will remain because it is bulky, specialized, and misunderstood. Perfect. That means it may still be there when the easy resources are gone and everybody else is busy fighting over the last flashlight batteries, like raccoons with ideology. Of course, extracting value from a piano takes labor. You need tools, caution, and enough sense not to turn a tensioned string system into a lesson on facial injuries. This is not a toy. Those strings are under real force, and careless disassembly can absolutely hurt you. So, patience matters. Eye protection matters. Controlled release matters. That's another useful survival rule, by the way. The more energy an object stores, the less you get to improvise around it like an idiot. Springs, fuel, pressure vessels, hanging loads, tensioned wire thieves are not suggestions. Respect stored energy, or it will educate you. But handled correctly, the payoff is absurd. A single abandoned piano can support trapping lines, shelter improvements, field repairs, insulation upgrades, mechanical improvisation, cookware construction, and a reserve of tradable metal stock for months. That is not exaggeration. That is the plain arithmetic of material quality multiplied by scarcity. In a future where supply chains are gone and every durable component becomes harder to replace, the person who sees a piano clearly is the person who sees farther than everyone else. So, picture the scene: an abandoned building, dust in the air, broken glass underfoot. Somebody already ransacked the kitchen, stripped the copper they could reach, smashed cabinets, and left behind the useless things. In the corner sits an old upright piano, quiet, heavy, unfashionable, and untouched. Everyone else who came through saw dead weight. You see wire, pins, wool, iron, wood, hardware, springs, and possibility. You don't hear music. You hear tools. You hear heat. You hear trap triggers clicking shut in the woods. You hear metal ringing under a hammer. You hear the soft, beautiful sound of being less doomed than the next person. And that, in the end, is what survival really is. Not strength, not bravado, not pretending you're the hero of some streaming series with immaculate hair and conveniently timed explosions. Survival is noticing what the world is still offering after it stops being polite. It is seeing value where others see scenery. It is understanding that the line between culture and utility, between elegance and brutality, between beauty and function, was always thinner than we like to admit. So the next time you walk into a deserted church basement, an abandoned school, a dead hotel lobby, or a half-looted house, and you see a piano sitting there untouched, don't laugh. Don't ignore it. And for the love of whatever remains sacred, don't burn it first. Because while everyone else is still searching for survival in the places they were taught to look, you'll be standing in front of one of the best material caches in the building, smiling like a lunatic who just found an iron mine with ivory keys.